Two, three, four. This is Armadillo, also known as King Rat. And this, I promised you, I'd tell you the obituary of Otto Hans Fritz. And you really got to be drunk to tell this story. And I think I'm properly drunk tonight. I've had a long day. I may have a brain tumor, or I may be having the explosive hydrocephaly that is just before really devastating Alzheimer's. So let me tell the story before it's crushed out of my brain. Otto Hans Fritz married my sister Melanie, the evil wicked witch. But then he would, because I'm not really sure if his mother was very much different. But also, we all know that Otto just wanted to get married like so many military men before they went off to die in Vietnam. They always wanted to have somebody waiting. Let me take a big swig and start with the beginning of a story. And I am the father confessor to Otto Hans Fritz, who was from a Catholic family. He told me things that he really didn't tell his children or anybody else. So if you're looking for the correct story, it's here. It will probably take me up to an hour, not tonight, maybe 30 minutes, but please stand by. I've got a great story to tell about somebody whose ancestors really were a significant part of history, and he was too. That's the difference between all them, my brother-in-law and other Vietnam vets. Was he was one of the first friendly fire injuries. I'll come back to that. And his mother's father was a significant historical figure. Let me get a little pull of this bottle. Yeah, I know I'm in some stinking RV out in the middle of nowhere in Burleson County, Texas, but I'm about to go back to Austin. Today I really figured out I'm surrounded by a bunch of meth heads and shit like that. I might as well go back to, and especially if I'm going to die soon, I might as well go back to where does it really matter where I die? That was Otto's same concept. Otto Hans Fritz, which his mother obviously named him after a famous German scientist, Otto Hans. His father was a U.S. Marine attached to the U.S. Embassy in Beijing, then known as Peking. He didn't get to meet his father until he was almost like 60 years old, his biological father. I may refrain from talking about his mother, but he was born in a Japanese concentration camp in China. His mother went dry. He almost died. He survived a lot. That's Otto. The only reason I'm giving you any respect at all out of my family is that you are a killer just like me. You grew up under harsh circumstances just like me. And if you don't know what it's like to be the youngest of the Kruger brothers, it's almost as bad as being in a Japanese concentration camp in China. The Chinese, his mother was fabulously wealthy, from a fabulously wealthy family, father. The Chinese nationalists and the Japanese pretty much took over her father's last brewery, five-star brewery in the Beijing, Peking district. I think it's actually her father that introduced beer to China. To the best of my knowledge, I've researched it a bit. Beer was not common there, no more than like dairy products are common today. And his mother managed to escape with the nationalist Chinese allowed his mother to only take enough to furnish a small apartment in Czechoslovakia. But that current chinoiserie is worth at least 80 to 120, 40 million bucks. There's one rug that's got like 7 pounds of spun gold in it, and there's the last appraisal I heard was around 80 million. And now his lesbian, no good daughter who wrote his wife's obituary is in control of all that, plus his real estate that he accumulated, because he had the old world work ethic and stuff like that. He loved to fly, but you can only fly 70 hours a week. The rest of the time you can use that flying money to buy houses, stuff like that, and then rent them to, or lease them to people. And not knowing that cousin Brucey Williams told everybody, don't ever get into the real estate business, the land, the landlording business, unless you've got the money to do thousands of units and hire other people to take care of all your work. But anyway, Otto essentially wasn't a bad guy, but once he fell under the spell of my sister, he began to lie, repeat her lies, etc. But I'm going to kind of jump ahead now. I'm sorry, this is going to take at least 30 minutes on just part one. If you're like a good storyteller like me, hang around. Even since high school, I've been the A+ fiction. Well, it's not, this is nonfiction, but I've been an A1, A+ storyteller since attending a high school that was technically linked to Stanford University. I mean, a large part of our curriculum was at Stanford, code writing, Hebrew, a bunch of languages that we didn't have on campuses, and so on. But Otto Hans Fritz was the daughter of Vera Kara, who, to the best of my knowledge, her father was the brewer to the last Tsar of Russia, run out of Russia and into China, where he became and negotiated the exclusive brewing rights for the Peking, Beijing district, which made him fabulously wealthy. And so she spent a while. I really don't know the part in between that and her coming to Texas from Czechoslovakia, other than the fact that there are a lot of Czechs in Texas. She must have developed some connections, and she got here with her son, married another guy, produced a couple of more sons and a daughter, and she went through, I think, like 6 or 7 husbands. Another chug. This is a drinking tale, buddy. I like travelers and people that have traveled and gotten to know other people. I'm tired of people that have sitting in their mother's basement their whole life, never been anywhere. They have nothing of interest to say that I want to hear. The story of Otto Hans Fritz is interesting, especially because in Vietnam, by the way, I mentioned this before in another video, that he was so desperate to get married before going to Vietnam that my sister was his second offer. And my sister, who had a child out of wedlock, Forrest Allen Jones, aka Duke or Puke Jones. When she found out that the ring that he gave her, he had already offered, put on the hand of another woman, and then gave to her. She never let him, live it down. In the meantime, she had an illegitimate, out of wedlock child, Duke Jones of Houston, Texas, waiting in the background to pop up. It was endless. I understand why my sister was totally psychotic in her marriage and in mostly in her marriage. It was because she had a secret she wouldn't admit to. And she'd already gone through the torture of Otto's insistence that people not smoke inside of his house. I'm going to tell that story, I think, right now. To the best of my knowledge, it was the much publicized Operation Longhorn. My brother-in-law, Otto Hans Fritz, was a helicopter pilot, mostly rescue, not gunship stuff. And then they asked him to do a ground operation. And he, with another lieutenant, took 38 men into North Vietnam, way past the DMZ, in violation of all of our agreements, on what was supposed to be some sort of recon. But once he got out there towards the end, he realized that's why he never really owned a gun again. Never, because in Texas, you cannot discharge a firearm without a. I talked to him about it one day. I got, purple? You don't have a hunting license? You can't. Purple means cross this line, you get a Purple Heart, as in you get shot. In his adult life after Vietnam, he never again discharged a firearm, never owned a firearm, never discharged one. In regards to Otto Hans Fritz and Operation Longhorn, the published records are bullshit. I can tell you that much about this government and the media. Because I was there the day that the Army, they sent, I think Army, but they sent a military officer to my parents' home, which I was home from, this is 19. So I was home from California, and they came in and advised let my sister know, Melanie Kruger Fritz, let her know that her husband had been wounded in Vietnam, but he was alive. But he was only alive really because he deliberately, and I get it, I want to try to tell his son, Eric Hans Fritz, I know your father better than you ever will. And I get it. He deliberately murdered 38 of his own men while he himself knew that he had a chance of survival because he already had the rope strung across the creek, and he knew he could, once the bombs started landing and passing over the Razorback Mountain in Vietnam, he had some chance of survival. Well, the rest of them motherfuckers did not have any chance of surviving whatsoever. None. Zero. He knew he was going to. But I understand, talking to him as being father confessor, I understood his rationale, which is that if they got caught by the Vietnamese, the Viet Cong, they were going to be tortured endlessly unto death, and that blowing to pieces would be certainly a lot better. And Otto, now that you're dead, and if you're listening to me up in heaven, because you're supposed to be a devout Catholic, which is why your daughter claimed you and your wife were, when my wife was a total Buddhist, atheist, Catholic hating bitch. I get all that. still doesn't excuse you. He only, after the, let me back up here because I can tell I'm only at 15 minutes. I got plenty of time. I want to take another swig and light a smoke. I love the tales of rugged seafaring men and real military guys and stuff like that who actually been in the shit like me. I'm not putting up with any of that pussy ass Blackwater, what's the term? Polo shirted, overpaid gangsters, which actually they don't even make as much as I used to make. Well, they actually make the same. But this is the way the story went, and this is why I understand why Otto would take forever if it took to take my sister to keep from smoking, despise smoking his house. But, at the same time, Otto, you're quite a booze hound. You did it on my mother's funeral reception. The minute I point out, are you having a stiff one? As in stiff drink, he immediately knew he needed to pop up and drive me back to my hotel because I wouldn't tolerate being driven by a drunk. So, Otto Hans Fritz and some other lieutenant led, 4 squads into North Vietnam. Once he got up there, he really realized that his commanders didn't have any objective other than them being bait for the NVA. And once the NVA split them up, busted them up, caught them, because that's the problem with smoke, is that American tobacco or tobacco-hungry fucking troops can smell, especially meat-eating white boys who have American tobacco. I can too at times, especially like whores with a bunch of goddamn perfume on them and fucking faggot, fucking black pimp people. I could smell you from like a mile away. They all closed in. They broke up. He told me about the night before the bombing run that it was just him and his radio man, because the commanding lieutenant doesn't carry a radio. All he carries is a sidearm to shoot anybody that tries to attack him. If you're not familiar with the military, that's the way it worked. All he needs is a short arm, 45 caliber, to kill anybody that tries to become head of the pack. But I don't really. So he told me about him laying in the bush all night and stuff like that. And then just before daybreak, he called in a strike on his own position, which meant certain death for all his men and possible death for him, except him and the radio man had already strung a rope bridge, just a rope across a narrow but deep creek, which he admitted later that as soon as he heard the first bombs, he let go of the rope and dove to the bottom, dug in with his fingers, and clang on there. And yet he still picked up 5 huge pieces of shrapnel, one of them which went into his pleural cavity, his chest. And yet 6 weeks later, he was ready to get back in the field and prove he was a real man, because he was born in a Japanese concentration camp in China. A lot of people, a lot of women and other loser, pussy, fairy motherfuckers don't understand that people that are born in war are special people. Otto Hans Fritz, in my mind, even though he is totally pussy whipped by my sister, will always be a soldier and a special person, because at least his balls were made of at least iron ore, not titanium like me, but at least iron ore. And I hope Eric, Hans, Fritz are listening to this. I'm going to look you up and send you a link. I knew your father better than you ever will. But your father and my sister had this. Your father, I think, is the one that introduced that weird European habit of kissing children, male and female, on the mouth. You know, that really, as a native Texan, original Texan, just kind of creeped me out. I'm serious. I ain't joking here. My sister and brother-in-law were the first people I ever saw, even out in California. First people I ever saw that kissed their male and female children, both mommy and daddy, on the mouth. So, Otto, Hans, Fritz, unlike my sister, who's an evil witch, in Toto, I don't think you're a bad guy, especially on the circumstances in which you were born. And I wish I could say more, but you kept backing up your evil wife and my evil brothers. So you're not going to get any kudos from me other than the fact that you, most of the time, behave like a real man until you drop me off after my mother's funeral. Let me back up here. You know, my mother's funeral, Otto even asked me what the dress code would be. And I said casual, and I showed up pretty formal. He showed up in some old leather jacket and stuff like that because he was a casual kind of person. My brother Charlie comes in from California wearing a fucking Armani suit and shit. I just dressed up because that was about the only thing that fit me at the Walmart, you know. White shirt. I already had a bear claw bolo tie, some black slacks, other stuff like that. But I may be able to finish this in one 30-minute segment. Otto Hans Fritz married my sister, even though she was clearly like a drunken man chaser. Otto Hans Fritz, I will testify before the Lord Almighty that despite the fact that you killed 38 of your own men, that you're not really at heart a bad person. And I really don't know what to say at this point in time. I'm 24 minutes in and I'm running out of words because it's hard to say bad shit about somebody that I know that worked diligently his whole life to provide for him, his no good wife, my sister, and his two children, and his mother. Actually, for those of you that don't remember, when Otto asked me for a reference for a greenhouse builder and stuff like that, I told him it's Emerald in Austin. Then I had to tell him how to draw up the legal letters of demand and so on and stuff like that. He had to fire Emerald. I had to threaten Emerald with suit because they built his mother, who was stinking rich, didn't really. They built his mother a greenhouse under her house, which actually I think came before the husband before Ali Doobie. They built a greenhouse in which they assembled with just ordinary steel, I think barely anodized steel screws instead of stainless, so that the bimetallic corroded the screws to nothing. It was started leaking within less than a year. He didn't know what to do. He called me. He was constantly doing this flip-flopping with them. That's my only problem with Otto Fritz, is that he flip-flopped between hating me and admiring my intellect and my help and stuff like that. I will say this before I go, because I can see the clock time. When my sister started her attack on me, maybe I'll back up a little bit. Well, I quit playing ball at A&M because I was already old enough to accept the contract from the San Francisco 49ers. Didn't want to. And the coach, Emery Ballard, was a total fuck up. I went to my sister's house. I had this old, ancient Chevy Bel Air that my sugar daddy had bought me because he was fucking too cheap to fucking buy a brand new car for the player that the entire team was counting on. At least the coach was. And all the Aggies were, because the Aggies never won a freaking Southwestern Conference championship without a Kruger brother on the team for a 50-something year period. And this is what happened when I went to my sister's and stuff like that. After about a few days, I quickly realized that my sister doesn't wash the dishes. Stuff like she comes and goes as she pleases. Her bank account is separate than her husband's. And then she told me that Otto said I had to pay rent, which I did every week, besides mowing the lawn, pruning trees, cutting down trees, washing her 12 sets times 8 of dishes and silverware. And actually, that's the one thing I'm really grateful to Otto Fritz for, is that he taught me, as a tall man like him, how to stand in front of a sink, because most sinks are built for women, and to splay out my legs so I wouldn't develop back pain, because he had jumped out of a helicopter just a year and a half before and spent 6 months on his back due to the spinal compression of landing correctly on his butt. And I even built onto the house. I cold jointed up and built onto the foundation, which allowed Otto to build a maintenance shed or whatever, and did all sorts of things. And yet later, my sister, his wife, got him to concur with her that I didn't pay any rent, etc. I was just, and you know what, Otto, Hans Fritz, you came up to me one day and I said, I like you. You're not like your sister Rhonda. You come in here, you might eat a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, but she used to come in and just eat our best steaks, etc. And I appreciate the fact that you're not eating our food. I didn't have to. I had a job. The minute you quit the team as an Aggie, you got a job and stuff like that. I ate out, I smoked pot, went to the movies, only came to their home to sleep for maybe 6 hours before I went back to another shift or another day in construction. So this is at least part one of the biography and obituary of Otto Hans Fritz. I'll see you on the second part.